This podcast contains content such as bullying and mental health topics and may not be suitable for listeners who are impacted by these topics. If you are experiencing issues in your workplace or would like more information on resources available in your location, please check the show notes or head to www.supercooltoxicworkplace.com.
From the get-go, pretty much sets the tone on his management style.
Was he fired or was he allowed to quit? Why has there never been anything released? Why weren't my complaints followed up? Even if it had to be anonymous, many people over many years complaining should have had some effect.
There was a lot of hierarchy, a lot of really quote-unquote masculine language, and that was already set in place before I started.
This is Super Cool Toxic Workplace, Episode 2, Warpigs. I'm Kate Bailey. On this episode, we hear from former employees of Pride Mikkeller establishment Warpigs in Copenhagen. We cover a long timeline of repetitive patterns, starting with testimony as to how it was being the first employee of the establishment to how it has been more recently. Frankly, much of the stories that I began to see in the beginning centered around Warpigs, and it feels as though we could have made an entire podcast just about that establishment. But instead, today I bring you 3 stories from those who have worked at Warpigs. Warpigs was opened in April of 2015, and it was a project between Mikkeller and 3 Floyds Brewing from the United States. The concept was to create an American-style diner bar, and essentially what opened was exactly that. A bar serving Texan barbecue. And this bar was named after a Black Sabbath song, Warpigs. We'll now meet the first employee of Warpigs ever, Camilla. And this is her story. I do want to note before you listen to this that there are some audio issues. It's just how it is. We did the best we could. I started by asking a little bit about her role at Warpigs.
I was the first employee at Warpigs. That was the end of 2000. Okay, it's a long time ago now. It's the end of 2014. I was hired, just in December-ish. Yeah, but I started doing brewery tours and started developing the membership program, the Warpigs. What was it called? Warpigs Troopers, and building the brand, the social media, the press, and all that. Yeah, 10 months later. Yeah.
Obviously, a lot happened in those 10 months. Would you first like to walk us through what your job was with Warpigs?
So it was actually still a building site. So I was the first person they took on to sort of get the brand going. So everything from starting social media, starting a membership club, web shop, before actually having a venue. So, yes, I think I can't remember when we opened, but I think it was at least 3 months later or something.
So how did it feel to finally have this job and be working for this company and to be a part of the environment there?
It was, it definitely felt very special to get that job because Mikkeller was seen as a very special company. It had for me it almost mythical. Maybe not mythical, but sort of a really special shine to it, and being sort of this person that you weren't really allowed to talk to. And literally, when you came into the office, he was at the end of the office, to facing everyone, and then people were just lined up on his side, and no one was allowed to really talk that loud because he didn't like noise.
Talk us through the, going from the beginning of your employment further along into your employment. What was the environment like? What experiences did you have?
To be honest with you, as I started, it was actually really fun. I guess I'm used to being quite self-driven and always been used to doing project work. So for me to just run with it was just my kind of thing.
They go on to say that they actually got praise in their first months of work from the person that hired them. That was Peter. And Peter did give praise in the beginning.
Probably because I did a really good job and also because I was very independent. So yeah, in the beginning it was great because like it was such a fun project and there were so many things that I was good at that I could do, and I just felt really proud for like doing it. So the beginning was great. Yeah, pretty much like I remember actually the day because we did like a 3-day opening thing, and then the next day we had a family and friends dinner, and then we had a membership opening as well, and then I think we had the real opening. But anyway, all of a sudden at the family and friends event,
Peter
stopped talking to me like during the event. It sort of just escalated from there. He basically was like, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. Like, what did I do? I did not do anything. But I think he just thought maybe I thought I was too important because I'd done a really good job. And at that point, when I was like, it would have been a great time, like, oh, great job with this like opening event all by yourself. Instead, I started getting the silent treatment, basically being put in my place. It was quite a turn. And then it just got worse and worse from that. Maybe he saw like I had done the hard bit kind of thing. I'm quite confident as a person. And I think all of a sudden that really pissed him off. Because I was taking ownership of the project and, again, run with it because that's what I do. But all of a sudden that seemed to be really annoying to him. He talked a lot about hating diva behavior. And I think diva behavior was very much just like you asking for things or pushing back on things or just like being human. What started to happen after that event was that he started calling me sensitive a lot, or like a typical woman happened a few times. Yeah. But yeah, I remember he called me a typical woman when I can't even remember what it was I pushed back on. Or he also would like ask you quite often if you were pregnant. But anyway, yeah, I know that he did that with other, like at least one other woman in the company. Yeah, if you were like off sick or you were like turning down beer, he was like, "Oh, please don't tell me you're pregnant." You're like, not really, your business, but you know, it seems just like because he used to be a military man, like he had this I remember he said to me once that he would probably better at handling stressful situations than me because he's been to war. So that probably explains a little bit like his view of, because I guess at that point it was still not very, like a lot of women in the military. He probably had this like really old school like way of seeing what a good employee should be, like how you should be like no feelings, hardcore, just like, but like working for a brewery should not be like being in a war. I just worked and worked and worked, and I tried to so hard to do a good job. So I mentioned the whole like how he would call me like oversensitive and maybe not cut out for the business. So it was like this meeting, and he said in front of everyone that I would have to earn my salary through doing brewery tours. And that was like a tiny fragment of my job. Like I did all the PR, all the social media, all the events, which was a huge, like tons of things. And brewery tours was a fragment of it. And instead, he just made my role sound so small in front of everyone. And I asked him, if that's what you think, could you please not say that in front of all the other managers? And he said, well, if you're going to be that sensitive, you're probably not cut out for this business. And I think it was like that in that context, he said like I was being a typical woman. Also remember when, because I dealt with a lot of Danish press, there was especially like a couple of male journalists that I worked with, like were really nice guys. And
Peter
would say on several occasions that they probably wanted to sleep with me. And that made me really uncomfortable because I thought I was just doing a good job. And then that was in my head. And I had to like all these, I think this is what I always struggle with. Like this is what always gets me really angry. Is like that women have all these like extra layers of bullshit they need to deal with on top of their careers. Maybe people we don't want attention from in certain ways. That's like your boss saying like, oh, the men would probably want to sleep with you. So I have to think about not seeming like I want to sleep with them, or, like it creates all these like inner things you need to navigate through while you're doing your job. And when it started to get really bad, like further down the line, so I remember once we sat like the whole team, and we were like in the daily team, what were we, maybe 7-8 people, like bar manager, floor manager, brewers, me, the GM, and then
Peter
pointed his finger in my face. I can remember like this felt like, it might not sound like a big thing, but just imagine this work meeting and someone actually leans over the table and points the finger this close to your face and asking you to like, I can't even remember what he said, but it was like, oh, you, like it wasn't even a sentence. It was like pure anger. And I think actually that was when I decided I had to leave, because it started to get like, oh my God, I feel like I had so many things, but like it started becoming this narrative, because like he would act like this in front of my coworkers. And I started noticing that the other male managers would talk worse and worse to me as well, because these things sort of trickled down. And then it was just like the GM at Warpigs came back to me the next day saying that the boys at the headquarters thought I was lazy. And it was almost like they specifically probably went for the thing that I would upset me the most, because I worked at, I think without exaggerating, 60 to 70 hours a week at that point. And I worked weekends and it was full on. So being called lazy was like incredibly hurtful, just because I said no to one single task. And it just, now when I think about it, it's just so clear to me that it was not about that task. It was just about like, how dared I say no to one of the boys in the headquarters kind of thing. And they would like stand together to make sure that I knew that, which was like incredibly creepy. This was like going on for 9 months. And as I said, like I was often given sort of silent treatment. It was very like on staff events. Like when we were going out, we had like staff events now and again. He would literally go over to like coworkers standing next to me, giving them high fives and talk to me, and then not even look at me. I think like at that time, that was the worst bit. Because it would be so bad that people asked what I had done to piss them off. And I had no idea what I had done. Actually, I get a little bit upset thinking about that. Sorry. And I actually started to believe that you're lazy and whatever, because then you're easier to control. I think the aim is like to make you feel replaceable, so you work harder all the time. Because if you feel important, you might like actually demand things. So yeah, that was like one of the, like weirdly, even that was worse than getting the finger in your face, because like you start to feel like something was wrong with you. And luckily I had like lots of good friends and family and my boyfriend who like knows me, who could see like how shit I was feeling, reminding me that God, I don't know why I'm just like ages ago, but deep breath. Yeah. Reminding me that I was absolutely like smashing it, and it wasn't anything to do with me. Because like there would be manager meetings from like all the bars and stuff, and we would meet like, I can't remember, maybe every second week, third week or something. And I've always come like really well prepared. Specifically remember
Dawn
would always ask me to take notes, because I was usually the only woman there. And everyone else was sitting with their computers. And like I remember like a lot of the dudes had not come prepared. They came like hungover and like, and I was sitting there, I had like ideas and everything, and then I had no room of presenting them because I was taking notes for everyone. It was just like in one of those other layers of absolute bullshit you have to deal with as a woman and really try to do a good job. And then you become like, and there's nothing wrong to be a secretary, but that was not my job. And you don't say no to the fucking owner of the company. Like, no, I don't want to take notes. No, he should know better. And that he should endorse a work culture where you don't ask the only female manager at the meeting to take the fucking nose. Like, he should know better, but he didn't. And all the male managers saw this. So obviously that would create culture where it was okay to ask women to do these things instead of listening to their ideas and see them as equal. And again, I also have to point out that one of the things that I found like most appalling about the time at Mikkeller was other male managers on the same level as me never saying anything, or maybe shaking their heads like in secret with you, like, oh, I'm your ally, but then never speaking up in context where it would actually matter. So fuck them. No. Yeah, so like he was, as I said, like the project manager at Warpigs, but he hired this general manager for Warpigs, but he would always do really like cringy jokes about women and homophobic jokes and racist jokes, you know, in that like really typical Danish way when it's like, oh, it's just a bit of fun, isn't it? Like kind of stuff. And I would constantly like ask him not to do it because we had people of color working for us. We had obviously women working for us. We had queer people working for us. But that was him in a nutshell, this new GM. And he was like the worst. He was so keen on being one of the boys. He would constantly throw me under the bus. And he would also like all our successes would be communicated through him and he would like take the credit. I mean, he was just incredibly useless, like really, really bad at his job. But yeah, obviously he would look good because I was working my ass off. And there was also other people at Warpigs who did like a really good job that he would like completely take credit for. He would say shit like that I should be lucky as a woman to be hired in this kind of position because we were really expensive when we got knocked up. Yeah, we were like this expensive for the company when we became pregnant. I think I was like speechless at that time. It's like, you did not just say that. Like, what the hell? I think at this point I was just like, at that time, I think I was just like so like neck deep in this like toxic workplace that you just got so tired. You like just shook your head and like got on with your day kind of thing. And he was the one who like he would sometimes like I remember 4 specific times. Maybe when he had a bit of drink, a couple of them. But if he wanted me to shut up, he would like pantomime like masturbation sounds towards me and movements. Like sounds and movements like he was jerking off. And which was like, and he did that in front, at least like I know that at least once, 100% sure he did it in front of all the other male managers and no one said anything. It was really gross. Because what are you supposed to say when your boss does that to you? But it was just like so fucking humiliating. I think that's what I like. Here we are, like me working my ass off, trying to do a good job. And then my boss is like pantomiming jerking off to me. Like, what do you even do there? Like, I had no way to turn. I think that is like what breaks my heart. But like, I was completely worn down. Like it's just sad to think about like how energized and excited I was when I started and how absolutely worn down I was 10 months later. Like, it was like 2 different people. That's just really sad to think about because they could have been so different if it was like good management that like encouraged their staff to like, you know, grow and do better and do great stuff. Because that's the thing with Mikkeller, you definitely have the capacity to be like a really good workplace. Like handing in my notice, like the best thing I'd done for myself. I did not have a backup. I did not have another job. I just needed to get out of there. I feel like I'm very privileged that I had that option. I know a lot of people can't just walk out of jobs. A year or so after I left Mikkeller, we went to the Mikkeller Beer Festival in Copenhagen in 2017. And this, like, mind you, like, this is like a little bit less than a year after I left. Or like a year after I left Mikkeller.
Peter
would come over. They all spoke English, my bosses and my coworkers.
We lose the audio a little here, but they go on to say that their co-workers only speak English and no Danish, and
Peter
comes up to say some
sexist Danish joke. I can't remember what it was, but it was something like really lame in Danish. And then he would ask me in Danish, like, oh, did you get upset now? Did you get upset now? Like in Danish, it would be, er du sur nu? Er du sur nu? Er du sur nu? He would repeat it, crossing the table next to my new workmate. And it was just like he wanted me to break down or something, or like have a hissy fit. But I was like, no. My hands were shaking. Like, first of all, I didn't want to look upset in front of my new coworkers, and I just didn't understand why he was still coming for me. Like a year, I left the goddamn place. Like he probably got what he wanted, and I pissed him off so much by just existing. And then one of my coworkers later on told me that she and my new boss had been to a work function and
Peter
had told my boss it was a huge mistake that they hired me. It became like, it was so personal for him, and I never understood why. Like, I honestly never understood why, because fine if you can't like anyone, but still, you should be professional enough that you could keep that to yourself. I don't need to be liked by everyone at all. I just need to be like treated like with the same respect that I treat other people. But to like go to the extent that he did to make me feel so small, it just came from a really strange place. I feel like I do, to this day, I'm very confused by his reaction, but I also understand. It makes me even like understand even better that people are scared of him, because I definitely heard other people say that they are scared of his reaction if they disagree with him. I heard other coworkers, like former workmates, that are very nervous talking to him because this is like the kind of level of like aggressive behavior that he does, and that is super scary. I mean, I remember like coworkers saying they were scared of him, like using the word "I'm scared of him," like literally trying to go to other people in this business with issues or whatever. But it will always circle back. If you would ever call out anyone for making a joke that would make you uncomfortable in a professional setting, you would be the one who didn't get it, or being too sensitive, or But I think at the time, like when I left, it was like leaving a burning building. Like that was like how I felt. So I was like, I can't exactly remember maybe the aha moment, but it was like a realization at some point that I don't care enough about this job like anymore, because like I feel like absolute crap. People around me who care about me was like genuinely concerned. I was living with people who would hear me cry every day. My boyfriend could I couldn't like enjoy like going out on like a Saturday. I was constantly nervous and looking at my phone and, like for work emails, and constantly nervous of fucking up. Looking back at it now, made to believe that this was just part of the game. Like you were supposed to work this hard and you were supposed to just be able to deal with it. The healing or like pulling myself together, like first of all, I went to another workplace where there was like a more supportive team. So I think that was a big part of it. And then I think for me to physically remove myself from Copenhagen, because I think it would have been like a shitload harder if I had been not had the option to move to another big city, but like had to leave Warpigs and then find a job in Copenhagen. I have a hard time imagining I would have stayed in Beer, to be honest. So I think for me to be able to recover was like, it was key that I lived in a different city and met new people who didn't care about Mikkeller or, did their own thing. So I had a chance to take what I learned and like continue my career. But I mean, again, I don't want to make it sound like I moved because of Warpigs. It was just a good opportunity. But looking back on it, I think it definitely helped me recover and move on. Because I didn't have to like face it as much as I imagine some other people must have done when they're still like living and working in Copenhagen. As I mentioned, the reason why I find this important for me to talk about these things, like I am in a good place now. Like I don't have any I don't feel like I want to make them pay for what they did to me. Like that is not what it is for me personally. Like I want to make sure that like if anyone hears this or reads about this, that are in a similar situation, that they understand that it's not their fault. That there are people who have experienced similar things that have come out on the other side and done something, like, done well. But I will also say that it did damage my mental health gravely, because as I mentioned, I went in with such a positive attitude, so excited, so much energy, and then I just felt like I was just like put in an emotional tumble dryer and came out like all bumpy and worn down and less color than I had before, you know. And I was diagnosed with like general anxiety disorder afterwards, and had to go with therapy. It was like, I did not have that before. So if it triggered something that would have happened anyway, I don't know. But I did have like a really bad anxiety after for a long time. And even now when where the brewery I work at now are like the nicest people, most supportive work environment. Like and I still have a hard time believing it. It's almost like, oh, this is too good to be true. What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, it does stick with you to be treated like this. And I'm just happy that I have had the opportunity to like deal with it, and had like working experiences later on that have proven to me that that is not the way you have to feel to be able to do a good job. Like, you don't need to be feeling like you're constantly under stress, or, you know, constantly in fear of fucking up. Like, it's actually very possible to be in a supportive working environment with good management. Still, while I talk about this, constantly in my head, I think about how they would respond to the things I'm saying. So it's so deep in me now that, in a way, I'm going to, every time I say something, like mention the situation, they would say, oh, but you misunderstood that, or that was just a joke, or, you know, you're being too sensitive, or, you know, blah, 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 blah. Like, it's funny, like, how that, because, like, so deeply imprinted, like, it's almost like imprinted in me now that my brain still goes to those places while we talk about it, even though I know it's wrong. I mean, I hope things will change, but it just, like, scares me to think about, like, how much damage they can do to a person and how little they seem to care.
Do you think they understand the damage they have done to employees like yourself or others?
No, I don't. I honestly do not think they do understand or care, maybe, because I think the people who are in charge are very protective of their little bubble. I think for them to admit that something is fundamentally wrong would like challenge that little bubble, and that would be very uncomfortable for them. Like, made these statements about like being a super innovative, cool company, and this would like completely ruin that image, and they're like doing everything they can to prevent that from happening. So actually doing a sincere apology and like owning up to how they treated some people would be like way too costly for them in their heads. And I don't think even they think about it in actually human terms. Like, I don't think that's like what they care about. I think now it's just like to see like do damage control and like brand damage control. Like, that is like their concern thing. Like, there's not a part of me that thinks they care. Like, honestly. And I wish I was wrong. Like, 100%. I don't want people to be like that. But from what I've seen, experienced, and heard, I truly believe that they don't give a shit.
We're going to get to what happened to Peter a little bit later on. What's important to note about Camilla's testimony, however, is the way that it was a culture that potentially did start with one person, but became normal around the workplace. So that was the first employee of Warpigs. And the question is, did things improve from there? The next source that you'll hear from, while anonymous, did work there for a substantial amount of time. Their voice has been disguised to conceal their identity.
Tell me a little bit about starting at Warpigs.
Yeah, so I worked for Warpigs for about 3 years, and originally it was just because I needed a job, and I happened to know a little about craft beer, and yeah, I mean, I perceived it as a good place to start because, you know, they were famous and assumed that their product was quality.
And what sort of information were you given when you started there?
I mean, basically, like, in regards to anything, like, from starting at the company, I was never provided with knowledge of who was in charge at Mikkeller, and I basically had to learn as I went, and I was never told who to go to if HR issues were to arise.
And who was leadership and who were you reporting to?
In terms of leadership for a majority of my time there, I obviously knew that Don and his second in command, Peter, were the ones who were going to be in charge of everything. But essentially, I reported directly to our general manager at the time.
You won't be sharing your own specific story today, but you did want to share some insights and observations about Warpigs.
I think I'd like to share my story about the abusive general manager who, over my several years of working there, consistently displayed misogynistic, abusive, lunatic, and incompetent behaviors. Pretty much, he managed to create a toxic atmosphere of gossip and fear, keeping a few protected minions around him, executing his will out of fear of being treated like the rest of the staff, in a relentlessly disparaging and aggressive manner, by being blamed for his mistakes, being lashed out at, and sometimes downright insulted. Our Monday meetings were hell to sit through, and Friday evenings, with this manager getting more and more drunk and rude, made those shifts feel like a prison in my own bar, where you were observed and commented on within earshot. What really needs to be outlined is the misogynistic culture that this general manager made at Warpigs. Both the staff and customers' appearances were commented on in a perverted way. Staff were hired based on appearance, and a qualified woman almost didn't even get hired for a manager position because she was too hot and friendly. And apparently, that could cause trouble among male staff. After working at Warpigs there for too long, I pretty much became heavily depressed. I lost all sense of self-esteem. I felt stupid, worthless, stressed, anxious, and like a ghost shadow of myself that I couldn't recognize anymore. These various behaviors have been reported to HR and higher-ups at Mikkeller HQ, by me included. But despite the promise that he was on thin ice and they'd do something about it, in the end, nothing ever happened. And everyone who ever complained ended up fired or ended up quitting when understanding that things would never change. What would you expect from a company whose second in command is known for being crass to his female employees?
This second in command is Peter.
I've personally had an attempt from him to grab my boobs as a joke while on shift at bar, and I had to mommy him when he was too drunk, because you can't kick the boss out of his own bar, can you? All the while I would have to sit through hearing all about what if he wasn't married. The point of highlighting this behavior is to say that these types of happenstances are generally accepted behaviors, conceptions, pervasive throughout the entire company, and not just the work of a bad apple manager at a specific location.
We now hear from a source who worked at Warpigs quite recently. Of course, I start out by asking how their employment at Warpigs came about.
I worked for one of Mikkeller's establishments named Warpigs for around a year and a half. I had just moved to Copenhagen. I knew of Mikkeller, but that wasn't my focus. I have been in the craft beer world for years, so I thought it would be easiest to get a job in it here. Warpigs was the first to offer me an interview, and I was hired almost immediately. Having visited before, I liked the beer selection, and it seemed like an interesting place. I wasn't really invested in the Mikkeller brand, but it seemed big enough to offer further opportunities.
What were you given in terms of onboarding materials, handbooks, or information in regards to how to go about your job?
There was an official Mikkeller handbook we were encouraged to read, but in terms of day-to-day ops at Warpigs, it was largely whatever the people on shift with you shared. I worked with the bar manager, and he showed me some things, but it was learn as you go. A lot of gossip was shared about Warpigs and Mikkeller in general, bad experiences, who to avoid, what you could get away with.
So who represented the Mikkeller leadership to you?
I was made aware of
Don and Peter
as the two to watch. They came to Warpigs relatively often, but didn't associate much with general staff.
Based on your experiences, would you be able to highlight some of your observations about the company culture that you have from your time there?
Company culture at Warpigs was quite a party atmosphere. For example, turned a blind eye to after-hours drinking and allowed some bad behavior. It fostered closeness, but also distance if you weren't part of the gang. Staff worked hard mostly and drank often. He favored some staff over others, and that was very clear. This was expressed mostly in scheduling and forgiveness for transgressions, which would be punishable for other staff. Most tried to stay on his good side, but I often disagreed with his methods. He would hire mostly based on look, usually tattoos, etc., and was disinclined to hire people from certain countries. In terms of Mikkeller, there was very much a crew of special people, HQ mostly, some other bar managers, who expected and demanded more. This was in the form of access to the bar, access after hours for some, a loose system of invoicing many beers for quote-unquote meetings, special treatment. One woman, now in HQ, demanded I invoiced her personal beers at 12:30 a.m. after I had already closed the system for the day, and was very annoyed when I wouldn't acquiesce. Another member asked the GM to organize approximately 50 beers and bottles of bourbon to be sent by taxi to his house at around 1 a.m. after close. He lived within a 5-minute walk. Mikkeller running club members had sex in the staff bathroom.
Did you notice conduct you deemed inappropriate, be it towards yourself or a colleague?
Yes, often. To both myself and colleagues. People ran scared and didn't support one another. I brought up some issues in inspector meetings and occasionally during the interactions, but I was also scared of losing my job. I was often in his bad books for various reasons, most of them inconsistent and unfair. I eventually reported a variety of issues under the guise of looking for a new position in Mikkeller. I reported to HR. HR listened and did help me look for other jobs. However, all of the information I gave her about my treatment of other staff, and behavior generally went absolutely nowhere. I was clearly in a bad headspace mentally and needed help. I was angry, demoralized, extremely sad, and felt useless. I communicated those feelings clearly, both in talk and laterally by email, so there was no way it could have been misconstrued. As far as I know, it wasn't even passed on. Certainly there was no effect.
So HR wasn't really a safe option for you at that time?
No, not at all. You heard stories about HR airing private staff concerns and laughing about them. Everyone said not to trust them. I had heard from other people who had gone to HR and they were either ignored or their confidential information was shared. My largest issue is, after years of terrible behavior, terrible management, complaints to HR, bullying, taking money from the till for weed, paying it back, I'm sure, but still. Literally hiding behind a pillar whilst putting his beers on the brewer's tab since cameras were installed. Odd accounting, severely impacting the mental health of at least 3 inspectors, managers, and more staff. Was he fired or was he allowed to quit? Why has there never been anything released? Why weren't my complaints followed up? Even if it had to be anonymous, many people over many years complaining should have had some effect. No one supported me when I worked there and was unfairly targeted, not even staff I considered friends. How was that environment allowed to fester for so long? I was broken by the end of my time there. When I started, I was enthusiastic and tried to get involved in everything. By the end, I questioned my ability to even bartend. Once said, she couldn't be a manager. She's not even a good fucking waiter. And I think that also sums up how I felt about myself. Even though I have held much higher, more complex roles in the past, I felt worthless there. Warpigs was a very male-centric place from the start and set up to be so. In the general's room, private dining area, groups would ask us to get them girls. One of the key beers, Salmon Pants, is reportedly named based on women's genitalia. Male customers would gravitate towards other male staff, ignore female recommendations, make comments, all the minutiae you get used to as a woman in the beer world. On the other hand, women would make a beeline for the female staff. The craft beer scene stands here in Copenhagen are generally pretty sexist. It didn't surprise me that women were overall less valued at Warpigs, but that is sad in itself.
You'll notice that the sources often refer to the general managers of Warpigs as being the perpetrators of this harassment and bullying behaviour. Mikkeller will also proudly come out and let everyone know that both of those problematic managers have been let go. And this is a pattern that we're going to circle back to, certainly as we go on in this podcast. However, like this last source notes, there were never any real clear reasons as to why these managers were let go, and why they weren't let go when the complaints were first raised. And secondary to that, why the person who the complaints were made to has faced no reprimand for essentially allowing this behavior to continue. And once again, this is a pattern that we will revisit frequently throughout the duration of this podcast. Who knew what when? And why was nothing done? There's also the distinct sense that I had from listening to the testimony from these Warpigs employees that Don and Peter were present. They were present at this establishment. And from day one up until very recently, it has been plagued with the same problems. Obviously, a huge part of that problem is the fact that it was Peter's project. It was something he was very closely connected to. And as the sources describe, he was a part of the problem. And this is where the line of questioning really becomes about the relationship between Peter and Don. It's already a little weird to think about the fact that publicly Peter and Don are very open and even adamant about their muscles and brains dynamic. And given what we've learned in these testimonies today, we have to operate under the idea that Don was around when Peter was quite frequently. So the question is, did Don know? Because Don was the boss. And if Don didn't know, how did Don go through 5 years of being a CEO and not know it was this bad for that many people? And in the case of Warpigs, for women. And as I've said, I feel like there could have been an entire podcast made about just this establishment. I just think, however, it is problematic enough that there is testimony from such a long time ago, up until recently, that indicates that the company really did nothing to change. The company really didn't seem to care about what was happening to these people. And I guess most tragically that so many people ended up leaving under such terrible circumstances because they couldn't get help. And worse, what was poignant about all three sources' testimony was how they left the company feeling broken, a shadow of themselves. And as we go on to hear more testimony, that pattern becomes clearer and more incriminating for Mikkeller.
On the next episode of Super Cool Toxic Workplace.
Being a woman in beer, it's like you're already heavily criticized for abilities or knowledge. So I was like just trying to keep my mouth shut and soak up as much as I could.
I don't really know why they're saying that they weren't involved. Again, because I'm literally in contact with you every day.
I saw things at San Diego that were horrible. I did things about it. I tried to get a lot of support from Denmark, and I feel that they didn't take it very seriously. I know for a fact they both knew about the severity of these issues, cut and dry, in May, June of 2018 in San Diego.
Super Cool Toxic Workplace is a Hand and Heart media production and was written, produced, and hosted by Kate Bailey. To join in the conversation around episodes, follow at handandheart.eu on Instagram or at _Kate_Bailey_ on Twitter. Original music by Julia Laws. Design and social media templates were provided by the anonymous artist going by Bennis Gallery and were provided for free. For all information and resources relating to this podcast, including contact links should you wish to connect with Kate and the team, head to www.supercooltoxicworkplace.com. Thank you most especially to our sources, whose courage and commitment have brought you these stories today. And thank you for listening.